My name is Thalia Waring, and I was 30 years old the first time a court had to decide whether I was a person. I was standing in my own office with coffee I hadn't tasted when a man in a polo shirt handed me a folded citation and said my mom and dad had filed it that morning. I manage money for people who can't manage their own. That is my job. Licensed by this state, appointed by this court, audited every year. The paper in my hand asked that same court to hand my bank account, my car, and the apartment I pay for by myself over to my parents, because I was, in their words, too irresponsible to manage my inheritance. I signed for it. I said thank you. Then I went back and finished my 1 o'clock, because there was a family in the next room waiting to hear how their brother's money worked. But what their lawyer read out loud in that courtroom 11 weeks later is the part I still cannot explain. And what I did after the judge stood up cost me more than the petition ever could have. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel where the quiet ones finally get the last page, and where a family's worst secret usually turns out to be written down somewhere, in a drawer nobody thought to open. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Every Thursday at 4 o'clock I signed a clipboard at the front desk of Northgate Meadows. It hung on a nail by the coffee machine, a plastic board with a pen tied to it by a shoelace. 3 columns. Name, time in, relationship to resident. I always wrote the same word in that third column, and I wrote it fast, the way you write something you have written 900 times. Then I walked to room 214, where Delphine Rask was 84 years old and had nobody. She managed a school kitchen in this town for 31 years and fed other people's children twice a day, and when her memory started folding in on itself, there was no son to call. So the court called me. That is what I do. I am a licensed professional fiduciary, which means a judge signs an order and after that, I am the one who pays the bills, argues with the insurance company, approves the hearing aids, and shows up. 19 people, 19 files in a green accordion folder. I am the emergency contact for all 19 of them, listed on 19 intake forms in 19 different buildings around this county. It is a strange kind of math. On my own dentist's intake form, under emergency contact, I had written the name of the dental office 2 doors down because they were open the same hours and I could not think of anybody else. I did not find that sad at the time. I found it efficient. That is the thing I would like you to hold on to, because 11 weeks later a woman in a courtroom would look at exactly that emptiness and see an opening, and she would be right. My grandmother died in March. Doreen Danner, 88, in a recliner with the television on, which is how she said she wanted it. The estate closed in June, and the estate attorney called me on a Wednesday to say the transfer had cleared. $186,000 from a brokerage account she had opened in 1979 and never touched. It was not a fortune. It was a woman skipping lunch for 40 years. My father got a set of tools and a photograph of his own father. My mother got nothing, and my mother noticed. That Sunday I drove the 15 minutes out to Denio Street for dinner, the way I did most Sundays, and my mother put a roast on the table and asked me what I was going to do with the money. Not what I wanted. What I was going to do. I said I was going to leave it where it was. She asked if I had talked to anyone about it. I said I talked to people about money for a living. My father looked at his plate. My mother refilled my glass and said, in the same voice she used for the weather, "Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly at the end." I told her grandma had beaten me at cards in February. She said that people can hold a hand of cards and still not know what they're doing, and then she asked if I wanted more carrots. I have gone back to that sentence 100 times since. She was not talking about my grandmother. She was reading me a page out of a manual she had been working from for 31 years. On the Monday after that dinner, I sat with Dwayne Nash's sister and her husband in the room I rented downtown, and I explained for the 4th time why she could not simply buy her brother a truck. Dwayne is 71 and has a brain injury from a rollover in 2011. His money sits in what we call a blocked account, which means the bank will not release a dollar of it without a signed order from the judge. Not for me, not for her, not for anybody. His sister said that seemed like a lot of hoops. I said the hoops are the point. I told her I file an inventory, I file an accounting every year, I carry a bond that pays out if I ever steal a nickel, and a compliance investigator from the court can walk into my office any morning and ask for every page. Then I said the sentence I said in every one of those meetings, the one that was so worn down by then that it came out flat. The duty runs to the person who can't speak. She nodded politely. I remember thinking she thought it was a slogan. My office was one room in a suite of 6, shared front desk, shared printer, a lock on the door that any of the other tenants' cleaners could get past. So I did what a person working alone does. Every night I put the green accordion folder in my bag and carried the whole practice home to my 4th-floor apartment on Ridgemont Court. And because I lived alone, and because somebody has to be able to get in if you don't answer your phone for 2 days. My father had a key. The man in the polo shirt came on a Tuesday at 10 past 11, while Dwayne's sister and her husband were still in my office collecting their coats. He asked if I was Thalia Waring. He said it kindly. He handed me the folded packet and left, and I stood there holding it with 2 people watching me. So I opened it, because pretending it was a bill would have been worse. Petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate. Proposed protected person. Thalia Waring, age 30. Petitioners: Neil Danner and Rosalind Danner, parents. I read the grounds paragraph twice. It said I was unable to manage my property and receive a recent inheritance without substantial risk. It cited a prior acute psychiatric hospitalization in 2019. It listed, by category, everything they were asking the court to place under their control. Checking. Savings. The car, a 2016 sedan, with 140,000 miles. The apartment, which I bought in 2022 with a down payment I saved in $1,100 chunks. Dwayne's sister asked if I was all right. I said it was a family matter, and that we should finish the paperwork on the hearing aids. And we did. I want to be honest about the next 20 minutes. There was no scene at all. I went completely calm, the way you go calm when a resident falls and you are the one who has to call it in. It was later, in my car in the parking garage, that I noticed my hands were not doing what I told them. Someone had reached into the middle of my life and pulled out a file with my name on it, and the file said I was not a person who could be trusted with myself. I drove out to Sparks that same evening, because I have never in my life let a thing sit. My mother opened the door before I knocked and said, "You've eaten?" She poured tea. She put a coaster down first, and on the kitchen table, squared to the edge, sat a stack of paper held with those little colored clips she has used since I was in grade school. Blue for the current matter. Red for anything with a deadline. She did not move it out of my sight. She did not apologize, or cry, or tell me it was for my own good in those exact words. She sat down across from me and said the money had come at a bad time, and that I had been under strain, and that when people are under strain, they make decisions they cannot see. I said I was not under strain. She said that is what people under strain say. My father stood at the sink with his back to us, running water over a pan that was already clean. I asked her how she could do this. She looked genuinely surprised by the question. She said she had worked 31 years taking those calls at the county, deciding which ones got a file opened and which ones got a phone number and a good luck, and that if she had learned one thing, it was this: somebody has to be the one who says so. She said it the way you'd read a line off a laminated card. Then she asked if I wanted the tea in a to-go cup. Driving back into Reno with the windows down, I understood something I had not understood at the roast dinner. My mother was not going to fight me. She was going to file me. The green accordion folder was on the shelf by my door where it always was, and it was wrong. I keep my active files by month, because that is how the accountings come due, and anybody who has ever seen my desk knows it. The tabs were in alphabetical order. Someone had taken 19 files out of a folder and put them back the way a person puts things back when they are trying to be helpful or trying to be quick. I stood in my own hallway with my keys still in my hand and did the arithmetic. My father had a key. My mother had my father. The petition had been drafted, notarized, and filed within 4 months of my grandmother's money landing. I did not sit down and talk myself out of it. I called an emergency locksmith at 9:40 at night and paid $210 for a new deadbolt, and I stood there while he did it. Then I sat at my kitchen counter and typed myself an email, time-stamped, listing what I had found and when, the order of the tabs, the date, the hour, the name of the locksmith. I photographed the shelf. I photographed the folder. I did the things I would tell any one of my 19 people's families to do, because I am not a woman who assumes the best about a door that has been opened. Here is what I did not do, and could not do. I could not unsee a page. I could not know which accounts they had photographed, or whether they had photographed anything at all, or whether my mother had simply stood in my hallway and read. And I could not ask, because from that Tuesday forward, everything I said to my parents was going to end up in a filing. This state gives you a lawyer when somebody petitions to take your rights. They learned that the hard way, after a scandal down south that everybody in my line of work knows about, and nobody talks about at parties. So a week later, I sat down across from Kira Nadeau, 38, court-appointed, a woman with a gel pen and no small talk. I had brought 3 binders, tabbed, cross-referenced, 7 years of my own tax returns, my license history, my bond, my accountings, a spreadsheet of every dollar of the inheritance and where it sat. I slid them across the table the way I slide things across tables for a living. She put her hand flat on top of them and pushed them off to the side. "Ms. Waring," she said, "in this room, you're not the fiduciary, you're the respondent." I said I understood the process. She said I understood the process from one side of it. Then she explained the part that I had somehow never had to say out loud to anyone in 7 years of saying it. Anybody can file. It costs a filing fee and a form. They do not have to prove I am incompetent to make my life hell. They only have to make the court careful. And a careful court freezes things. She said the words temporary order. She said the judge could sign one without me in the room, without notice, on a showing that assets were at risk of dissipation. I asked when. She capped her pen. "Any morning," she said. "You'd find out from your bank." I went back to work. I had a hearing aid appointment for Delphine Rask on Thursday and a care conference on Friday, and for 2 days I let myself believe it would take longer than that. It took 9 days. On a Friday morning, my debit card was declined at a gas station on my way in for $11 of coffee and a windshield scraper, and I stood there in the cold reading a screen that said, "Contact your financial institution." I drove straight to the branch of Ridgeline Bank of Nevada on the corner near my office and asked the woman at the desk to tell me exactly what had happened, and she turned her monitor toward me because she could see my face. Court order. Preservation of assets pending hearing. Accounts frozen. No withdrawals. No transfers. And then I did the thing I do, which is that I read the list. My checking. My savings. The account with my grandmother's money in it. And then more lines. More account numbers than I have accounts. I counted them twice, on the counter, with my finger, like a woman checking a receipt. The order named 11 accounts. I own 4. I asked her whose the others were. She said she was not permitted to tell me that. I asked if she could at least tell me whether they were mine. She looked at the screen a long moment and said, carefully, that the order listed them and that the bank's job was to follow the order. Then she said something that I have thought about every day since. She said, "Ma'am, I can see they're not all yours, but I can't lift a judge's order. Only the judge can." I thanked her. I walked out into the parking lot. Somewhere in this town, there were 7 account numbers on a court document that had my name printed above them, and I could not think of a single innocent way for that to have happened. Nita Dowd called me at 1:20 that afternoon. She runs Northgate Meadows and she has a phone voice she uses for families and a different one she uses for me, and that day she used the family one, which is how I knew. Delphine Rask's monthly payment had come back. $4,700, returned by the bank, account restricted. I already knew before she finished the sentence. Delphine's money does not live with my money. It lives in a blocked account with her name and my title on it, And the only reason it would freeze is if somebody had put its number on a piece of paper and handed that paper to a judge. I did every single thing you are supposed to do, in order, that afternoon. I called the bank's legal department and was told, correctly, that they cannot release funds against a standing order. I wrote to the court's guardianship compliance office and flagged an irregularity on a protected person's account, and I got an automated reply saying my message had been received. I filed an emergency request for clarification, and the clerk told me the earliest slot on that department's calendar was 2 days after my own hearing. Every door was a real door, and every door was locked from the other side, and not one of them was locked by a villain. That is the part nobody believes. Nita let me talk myself all the way to the end of it. Then she said, gently, that Northgate has a policy, and the policy is 30 days, and that she would hold it as long as she could hold it. I said I understood. I sat in my car in the lot behind my office and did the arithmetic on a stranger's bed. Reba Kinnard has done my books 10 hours a week for 6 years. She is 58, she brings her own tea bags, and she is the only person alive who has ever seen the inside of my filing system and my checkbook at the same time. On Monday, she came in, put her bag down, and said she had thought about it all weekend. She would testify. She would swear out anything they wanted about how I work. She would call the other tenants in the suite. She would sit next to me at the table so I would not be sitting there by myself. I told her no. I had reasons, and every one of them was true. She is my employee, so her word is worth less. She would be dragged into a discovery fight. It was my family and my mess, and there was no version of it that was fair to hand to a woman who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I said all of that in about 90 seconds, in a very reasonable voice, and I watched her face while I said it. She let me finish. Then she picked up her tea and said, "You know you're allowed to have someone." I said I knew. I did not know. I opened my laptop and asked her to pull the third quarter reconciliations, and she pulled the third quarter reconciliations, and neither of us said another word about it for 2 months. If you are still with me, thank you. I know this part is slow. It was slow for me too. If you have ever had somebody in your family decide they knew your life better than you did, tell me in the comments, because I read them and I promise you are not the only one. And if you want to stay for what that lawyer read out loud in the courtroom, subscribe now so it doesn't get lost. The supporting declaration arrived in a stack of exhibits 3 weeks before the hearing. It was signed by Nadine Krause, 60, who worked the county intake line beside my mother for 19 years and who used to bring divinity fudge to our house at Christmas. She swore that she had known me since I was a child. She swore that I was isolated, that I had no partner and no close friends she was aware of, that I worked at odd hours, that I had been observed talking to myself in a parking lot in April. She swore that at 24 I had legally changed my own surname away from my family, which she described as a break with reality. I sat with that page a long time. I did change my name. I did it at a clerk's window on a Thursday afternoon. $22 and a form and a stamp, and I picked wearing off a list of my great-grandmother's people because it belonged to nobody who was still alive to have an opinion about it. It was the first thing I ever owned outright. In a sworn declaration, it reads like a symptom. That is the trick of the whole business, and I knew the trick because I have written reports myself. You do not lie. You take a life, and you rescore it. Working late becomes odd hours. Living alone becomes isolated. Talking through a phone call in a parking lot becomes talking to yourself. Kira read it and did not soften anything for me. She said the declaration alone would probably be enough for the judge to order an evaluation, and that an evaluation would take 2 months, and that during those 2 months, every account stayed exactly where it was. My father fixed school buses for 30 years, and now he works 3 days a week behind a parts counter on the east side of town, because he cannot sit still and my mother cannot stand him in the house. I drove over on a Wednesday because I wanted to look at him without her in the room. He came out from the back wiping his hands on a rag, and he did not look surprised to see me, which told me they had talked about whether I would come. I asked him one question. I asked him if he had let her into my apartment. He folded the rag. He folded it again. He said, "Your mother knows the forms, Thally." He has called me that since I was 4. Then his mouth opened, and I watched a whole sentence come up into his face and stop somewhere behind his teeth. And I stood on the customer side of that counter and did not breathe, because I thought he was going to tell me. He closed his mouth. He asked if I had eaten lunch. I said I had. He said there was a place across the lot that did a good patty melt, and he looked at the register, and a man came in behind me needing a serpentine belt. That was it. That was the whole rescue. I drove back across town to Ridgemont Court and sat in the parking space under my own building for a while with the engine off. My father is not a cruel man. He has never in his life raised his voice to me. He just signs whatever is put in front of him, and he always has. And I had spent 30 years calling that gentleness. Thursday, 4 o'clock. Clipboard, shoelace, pen, name, time in, relationship to resident. I had written that third column so many times that my hand did it without me, and for the first time in 7 years I stopped with the pen down on the paper and looked at what I was writing. Guardian. It is a true word. A judge signed an order and that word is legally accurate, and I had never once thought about it. And standing there in a lobby that smells like coffee and floor wax, I could not make it look like a relationship. It looked like a job title in a column that was asking me a different question. Delphine was having a clear day. You learn to tell in the first 4 seconds. She was in the chair by the window with her cardigan buttoned wrong, and she said my name before I said hers. And she asked me about the hearing aids, and she told me the girl on second shift sings while she does the beds. Then she stopped. She looked at me the way she must have looked at 800 children coming through a lunch line, and she said, "Are you mine, or are you theirs?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "The ones who send you." She meant the county. She meant the office, the order, the paperwork behind me. She was 84 with a memory like a bad phone line, and she had put her finger exactly on it. I told her I was hers. She patted my hand and said, "That's what they all say, honey," and asked when lunch was. I drove back to Ridgemont Court that night, and I could not get the third column out of my head. Carla DeVries called on a Monday and introduced herself as an investigator with the court's Guardianship Compliance Office, and she was so pleasant about it that it took me a second to understand what was happening. A protected person's blocked account had been restricted by an order in an unrelated matter. That triggers a review. Not of the order. Of me. She would need my inventories, my accountings, my bank authorizations, and a list of everyone with access to my records going back 3 years. She said none of this implied wrongdoing. I said I knew, because I have said the same sentence to other people in the same flat, kind voice. Here is a thing you learn working guardianship in a county this size. There is one department that hears these cases. One judge signs nearly every appointment order in this valley, and he has been doing it since before the legislature rewrote the whole book on us. When a compliance investigator opens a file, that file ends up on the same desk as everything else. So by the second week of that month, I was being examined from 2 directions at once. On one side, my parents' petition asking whether I could be trusted with my own checking account. On the other, the court asking whether I could be trusted with 19 other people's. Both files had my name at the top. Both were being read carefully by people doing their jobs correctly. Before she hung up, Carla asked me the question I had been avoiding for a month. She asked who else had access to my records. I told her the truth. I said my father has a key to my apartment, and I heard her stop typing. I should tell you about 2019, since my parents put it in a court filing. My grandmother had a stroke in February of that year, and I was 23 and working 2 jobs. My father said he was no good at hospitals. My mother said she would handle the paperwork and then did not, because the paperwork was for a woman she had never forgiven, for something I still do not know the shape of. So I did it. I did the admission forms and the insurance calls and the rehab placement and the argument about the second opinion, and I slept in a vinyl chair for 3 nights, and on the 4th morning I stood up too fast in a hallway on the 3rd floor, and the floor came up to meet me. 30 hours awake. No food since a vending machine sandwich. They kept me 4 days for observation because I could not stop shaking and because a young woman who collapses in a hospital hallway gets looked at properly. The chart said, acute stress reaction. That is the whole story. 7 years later, that phrase sat in a petition as the reason a court should take my apartment. And I want you to see the shape of it, because it took me until that autumn to see it myself. I did not break down because I was fragile. I broke down because I was the only person in my family who showed up, and nobody was coming to relieve me. They wrote that down as a defect. Then they built a life around the fact that I would always be the one who showed up. And when I turned that into a profession, they used the record of it as proof I could not be trusted. 10 days before the hearing, Kira emailed me the petitioner's exhibit list. 14 items. The declaration from Nadine Krause. Medical authorization requests. 2 photographs of my apartment taken from the doorway, which I did not know existed until that moment, and which I have never once been able to look at twice. And item 9. Schedule of assets of the proposed protected person. Kira said it was standard. In a petition like this, you attach a schedule of everything you want the court to place under the guardian's control, and the court works from that list. I asked to see it. She said we would get it. I said I wanted it that day. She explained, patiently, that the exhibits themselves were being served by mail, that the certificate of service showed they had gone out Friday, and that mail from a downtown law office to my address takes what it takes. The hearing was Tuesday. I asked her to file something demanding early production, and she did, and the department set it for hearing. And the hearing they set it for was the same Tuesday, 30 minutes before the main event, which meant the request would be heard by the judge who would then immediately hear the case. I want to be precise about my state of mind. I was not frightened of the schedule. I already knew what was in my accounts, down to the dollar, because I know what is in everybody's accounts. What I could not stop thinking about was the woman at the bank with the monitor turned toward me. 11 accounts on an order, 4 of them mine, and a stack of paper on my mother's kitchen table with a blue clip on it. She called me on the Sunday night before, at 8:10, which is after her news and before her show. My mother does not waste a call. She said she wanted to give me a chance to end it before we all stood up in front of a stranger. The offer was clean, and, I will admit, well built. They would withdraw the petition entirely. No hearing, no evaluation, no record. All I had to do was sign a private agreement letting them administer my grandmother's money for 3 years, with a monthly statement to me, everything friendly, nothing filed anywhere. I asked what happens to the apartment and the car. She said those were only in there because the lawyer said to put everything in. I asked her if she understood that what she was describing was a guardianship with no judge and no bond and no accounting, which is exactly the arrangement this state spent a decade trying to stamp out. She said, and I could hear her smiling, that I always did know the words. Then her voice went soft, and she said, "Somebody has to be the one who says so, honey. I'd rather it be me than a stranger." I told her no, not a speech, a single word, and then one more sentence, that I would see her Tuesday. There was a pause on the line and she said, "Then I'll see you Tuesday," and hung up before I could, which she has done my entire life. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher and understood that I had just declined the last easy exit that was going to be offered to me, and that the difference between us was not that she wanted to control me, it was that she genuinely believed somebody had to. Courtroom 3 is on the 3rd floor of the courthouse, and it has a low ceiling and chairs that were bolted down in a decade nobody is proud of. In the waiting area outside, there is a poster taped to the wall listing the rights of a protected person. 14 of them. The paper has gone yellow and the bottom corners have curled up like bread. I have walked past that poster 400 times, and I had never once read it all the way down, and I read it that morning while I waited, standing up, in a charcoal jacket I bought for other people's hearings. Nolan Reese came out of the elevator at 8:50. Charcoal vest, good haircut, a rolling case. He saw me and he smiled, the way you smile at a colleague you like well enough, and he said, "Ms. Waring." And I said, "Counselor." And that was the extent of it, and I understood in that second that to him, this was Tuesday. My mother sat in the second row with 3 sets of clipped papers squared in front of her. Blue, red, green. My father sat beside her with his hands on his knees. Kira put a legal pad in front of me and told me not to speak unless she touched my arm, and I said fine, and I meant it, because I have watched 200 people damage themselves in that room by explaining. Judge Roland Devane came in at 9 and read the calendar aloud in a voice like a man reading a grocery list. Our matter was fourth. When he called it, Nolan Reese stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "Your Honor, we'll begin with the schedule." He read it out loud, line by line, the way you read an inventory. Line 1, a checking account. Last 4 digits, current balance. Line 2, savings. Line 3, the brokerage account holding the inheritance. And he said the figure and let it sit in the air a second, because that was the whole theater of the thing. Line 4, the sedan. Line 5, the apartment on Ridgemont Court with the outstanding mortgage noted underneath. And then he kept going. Line 6, line 7. And by line 9 I had gone very still, because I had started to hear numbers I knew. I do not want to make myself sound like a magician. It is not a gift. When you are the fiduciary on 19 matters, you type certain account numbers so often that they sit in your hands the way a phone number from childhood sits in your hands. Line 11 was a blocked guardianship account at Ridgeline Bank of Nevada. I have typed that number onto a court accounting 7 times, once a year, every year, plus the original inventory. Line 12 was the representative payee account where a 71-year-old man's disability benefits land on the 3rd of the month. My mother had 3 sets of clipped papers on the bench behind me, blue for the current matter. And I stopped listening to Nolan Reese entirely because I was doing something else. I was standing in my hallway on Ridgemont Court 6 weeks earlier, looking at 19 files that had been put back in alphabetical order, and finally understanding that nobody had been reading them. Somebody had been photographing them. Reese turned the page and said, "Line 11 is held in the name of." He got the first name out. Delphine. Judge Devane's head came up off the page. I have appeared in front of that man perhaps 60 times, and I had never seen him look at anything faster than his own pace. He said, "Say that again," and Reese, still smiling, still pleased, repeated the whole line, name and account and balance, and the judge picked up his own copy of the schedule and read it himself, and the color went out of his face in front of 40 people. Then he stood up. Not slowly. The chair went back into the wall behind him and the clerk's microphone made a sound like tearing cloth. "Stop," he said. "Stop reading, put the page down." Reese said, "Your Honor." And the judge said it again, over him, louder, one word at a time. "Stop immediately." Then he turned to the bailiff at the door and said, "Nobody leaves this room. Call security and get me the clerk of this department now." And then he said the thing I will hear until I die. He did not say it to the lawyers. He said it to his own clerk quietly, while he was still standing. He said, "That's my ward." He signed the order appointing me for Delphine Rask 7 years ago. He signs nearly every one of them in this county. He knew that name the way you know your own children's teachers. Nolan Reese's smile did not fall off. It drained, from the bottom up, and he started turning pages in his own file looking for where the schedule had come from, and he could not find it, because it had not come from anywhere except a kitchen table on Denio Street. My mother leaned toward me across the rail. Her voice was not sharp. It was the first honest thing she had said in 4 months. She said, "Whose money is it?" I did not answer her because Kira had her hand on my arm and because I had just understood that I had won and that winning was going to be the smallest part of my year. The petition died on that table in under 90 seconds. I felt nothing that I recognized as relief. They kept us in the building for 2 hours. Somewhere around 11, I ended up in the 3rd-floor hallway with my mother, 12 feet apart on the same bench, because the deputy had asked us both to wait, and there was nowhere else to wait. She had her case open on her lap, and she was looking for something. She went through the blue clip, then the red, then the blue again. Her hands were doing a thing I had never seen them do, a small tremor at the base of the thumbs, and she kept licking her finger to separate pages that were already separate. She could not find it. Whatever it was not there. Or it was there, and she could not see it. And she stopped. And she put both palms flat on the papers, and she said, "To the wall? Not to me. I used to be able to find things." I want to be honest about what happened in my chest when she said that. Something opened. She is 62. She spent 31 years on the other end of that telephone deciding whose life got a file, and she is standing at the front of the same line now, and she knows it better than anybody, because she knows the forms. For about 4 seconds I was going to reach over. Then she raised her head, and her face reset, and she said, in the voice from the laminated card, "Somebody has to be the one who says so." And that was the end of it. My father stood 10 feet down the hallway by the water fountain with his hat in his hands and never once came closer. That's the part everybody assumes is the ending. It wasn't. Stay with me, because what I had to do next is the part my own lawyer begged me not to do. If somebody in your life has ever needed you to speak for them, share this with them before you go. And subscribe, because the last stretch of this is the reason I told the story at all. Kira took me to the coffee place across from the courthouse and ordered for both of us, which I appreciated more than I could say at the time. She laid it out like a woman laying out cards. The petition was dead and would be dismissed with prejudice. We could move for fees. There was very likely a criminal exposure for whoever obtained and used those account numbers, and if I wanted to press it, the district attorney's office had a unit for exactly that. She said all of it in the tone of a person delivering good news. Then she stopped and told me the other half. The breach happened on my watch. 19 protected persons' account numbers had left my custody, out of a folder I carried home every night, through a door I had given a key to. Nobody in that courtroom had asked me about it yet. If I stayed quiet, there was a real chance nobody would, because the file that mattered was now my parents' file, not mine. But if I self-reported to the compliance office, I would be handing the state a written admission that a licensed fiduciary let 19 people's financial records get photographed. That opens a review of my bond. That opens a review of my license. She looked at me over her cup and said, "You're the victim here, Thalia. Victims don't file reports about themselves." I asked her a question instead of answering. I asked who reports it, if I don't. She started to say the compliance office would find it in the ordinary course. Then she stopped because we both knew the truthful answer, and the truthful answer was nobody. Devin Rooks, my grandmother's estate attorney, called me that Friday. He had heard, because this is a small county, and the courthouse leaks like a colander. He said he had something in the file that was not part of the estate, and that he had been unsure whether to send. It came in the mail 2 days later. A half sheet of my grandmother's stationery, her handwriting getting away from her at the ends of the lines, dated the autumn of 2019. It said, "Devin, put it in her name only. Neil signs what he's handed. Give it to the girl." That was all. There was nothing legally useful in it. It could not unfreeze an account, or undo a filing, or make one particle of difference to what was coming. And I want to be clear about that, because I have watched a lot of people wait for a piece of paper to arrive and save them, and it does not work that way. Not in that building, not ever. What it did do was this. Devin told me, when I called him back, that in the fall of 2019 my grandmother had asked him what it would take to make me her guardian instead of her son, and that my mother had told her it would be cruel to put that on a girl who had just been in the hospital. So it never got filed. 7 years before anybody photographed anything, in a rehab room with the television on, the same argument had already been made about the same 4 days. My grandmother had seen it. She could not stop it. She just made sure the money went where the eyes were. The 30-day notice for Delphine Rask arrived on a Tuesday. It was a form letter, and Nita Dowd had written on the bottom in pen, "I'm sorry. I held it as long as I could. 2 months unpaid, plus the late assessment, $9,400. And Delphine's own money, $400,000 of it, honestly earned over 31 years of school lunches, sat in an account nobody could touch. because the order freezing it was still standing and the motion to correct it was still on a calendar, and courts do not move at the speed of a woman in room 214. I sat at my counter on Ridgemont Court at 11 at night with my laptop open, and I knew exactly what I was looking at. I could not move her money. I could move mine. And I knew, in the specific way that only somebody with my license knows, what it is called when a fiduciary puts personal funds into a protected person's obligation. It has a name. It goes in a report. It is the kind of thing that is described in a hearing as commingling, no matter how good the reason, no matter that the reason is a bed. I made the transfer at 11:22, $9,400 from my grandmother's money, straight to Northgate Meadows. Reference: Rask, D. Room 214. I printed the confirmation. I wrote the date on it in ballpoint, the way I have written the date on 10,000 pieces of paper. And then I did something I had not planned and did not decide. I started a new file, green tab, blank, my own name on it. I put the receipt inside and set it on the shelf next to the other 19. It took me 2 nights to write, not because it was long, but because a self-report is the only document in my profession that you write against yourself, and every sentence has to be true in a way that ordinary sentences do not. I listed the accounts, all of them, by matter, by number, 19 names down the left side, and beside each one the date range in which the file had been in my apartment and the door had had a key out in the world. I listed the night I found the tabs in alphabetical order and the hour I called the locksmith. I listed the photographs of my shelf. And then I wrote the last section. And the last section was mine. On the 14th, at 11:22 in the evening, I transferred $9,400 of personal funds to a facility on behalf of a protected person without prior court authorization in order to prevent a discharge. I did not add a paragraph explaining that she is 84 and that the discharge would have moved her 40 miles from the only building she knows. I wanted to. I have read enough of these to know what an explanation looks like from the other side of the desk. Kira called me twice while I was writing it. The second time she did not argue. She said a single word, "Don't," and waited. And I said I would see her Monday, and she made a sound and hung up. I saved the file at 4 minutes after midnight. Then I sat in my kitchen with the laptops closed and my hands flat on the counter for a long time because I had written it, and I had not yet done the part that was actually hard. I called Reba Kinnard at 7 in the morning, which is not a thing I do. She answered on the second ring with her mouth full. I had a whole approach ready. I was going to say I needed a set of ledgers pulled and then work my way around to it, and I got as far as her name, and then I stopped. Because I was tired of being the most careful person in every room I walk into. So I said it plainly. I said, "Reba, I'm going down to the compliance office this morning to file a report on myself, and I need somebody to come with me. I don't want to be the only one in the room." There was a silence on the line about 3 seconds long. Then she said, "What time?" I said 8:30. She said she would be at the door of the building at 8:15 and that she was bringing coffee, and did I want the good kind or the kind I usually drink, and I laughed, which surprised both of us. Then she said, "It took you 6 years," and hung up. I stood in my kitchen in a bathrobe, 4 floors up, behind a deadbolt I had paid a stranger to install at 10 at night, and my hands started shaking. Not in the courtroom. Not when the judge stood up. Not when the card was declined or when the notice came for room 214. Right then, holding a phone, after asking a 58-year-old bookkeeper to sit in a chair. 19 people have my name on their emergency forms. It had taken me until that morning to put one name on mine. The compliance office is on the ground floor at the back of the annex, and it has the kind of overhead lighting that makes everybody look like they are about to receive bad news. Carla DeVries came out to get us herself. There was a table, 3 chairs, and a window with a view of a loading dock. Reba sat against the wall with the coffees, and did not say one word for 40 minutes, and I could feel her there the entire time, which turns out to be the whole point of another person. I put the self-report on the table and Carla read it without her pen moving, which is how you know somebody is actually reading. When she got to the last section, she went back to the top of the page and read it again. Then I put down the second document, a written request that I be removed as guardian and as fiduciary in all 19 matters, effective on the court's convenience, with a proposed transition order for each. Delphine Rasks was on top, because if I had put it anywhere else I would have found a reason not to hand over the stack. Carla set her pen down. She asked me why I had not waited to be suspended. She said it kindly, and she said it as a professional, because from where she sat I had just handed her a case that she would otherwise have had to build. I told her the truth, and it was the same flat sentence I had said in 100 family meetings, and it did not come out flat at all. The duty runs to the person who can't speak. Carla looked at me for a second. Then she said, "You understand? This goes in the record exactly as you've written it." I said that was the idea. Dara Nyquist is a deputy district attorney and she handles financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, and her office is 2 floors up in the same building where Delphine Rask's guardianship file has lived for 7 years. She had already opened a matter because the judge had already referred it, but a referral is not a witness. She needed somebody to walk her through how the account numbers got out of a locked apartment, and there was exactly one person in this county who could do that. It took an hour and 10 minutes. I gave her the date I handed my father the spare key and the reason I handed it to him. I gave her the night I found the folder in alphabetical order and the locksmith's receipt, and the time-stamped email I had sent myself, and the photographs of my shelf. She asked me twice, in 2 different ways, whether I understood what my statement would be used for and who it would be used against. The second time, she said their names out loud so there would be no room for me to be vague later, and I said them back to her. Both of them, because a statement is not worth anything if you make somebody else carry it. Rosalind Danner. Neil Danner. My mother and my father. I signed at the bottom and dated it. I held it in that office. I got into the elevator and pushed the button, and I came apart for 4 floors, which is about 11 seconds. And then the doors opened into a lobby with a directory on the wall, and Reba was standing there holding my coat. She did not ask. She just started walking. In the parking garage, she said there was one more thing I had to do myself, and I said I knew. The license came back suspended pending review 11 days later, which everybody had told me it would. The bond company called it and started its own file. I gave notice on the room downtown and carried a printer down 4 flights by myself because the elevator in that building has been broken since 2023. Then came the part that no one warns you about, because no one in my profession ever has to do it. 19 transfers, 19 facilities, agencies, home health coordinators, and day programs who needed to be told, out loud, by me, that the person whose name is on the emergency form is not going to be that person anymore. I did them in alphabetical order. Not because it was efficient. Because if I had let myself choose the order, I would have stopped after the easy ones, and I know that about myself. I called a group home about a 50-year-old man who does not use words and who taps the table twice when he is glad to see somebody. I called a day program about a woman with a court-ordered budget of $40 a month for what the order calls personal discretionary spending and what she calls her lottery money. I called Dwayne Nash's sister and she said, "Wait, so they win?" And I said no, and could not explain it in a way that fit in a phone call. Northgate Meadows was last because of the alphabet, and I have never been so grateful to a letter. Nita Dowd took it well and then stopped taking it well. She asked whether I wanted her to tell Delphine or whether I wanted to. I said I would. Room 214, the chair by the window, the cardigan buttoned wrong. I told her that starting in about a month a different person would be handling her money and her appointments, and that this person would be good, and that I had picked the file to hand them myself. She listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "All right." And then she said, "But you're coming Thursday." And I sat there in that chair and could not answer her. Because I did not yet know if that was a thing I was allowed to be. 11 months have gone by. My mother pleaded to a gross misdemeanor for the unlawful use of another person's personal identifying information, and she got probation, restitution, and an order that keeps her out of any position with access to records, which is the only part of the sentence that touched her. My father pleaded to something smaller and paid a fine, and did his hours at a food bank on Saturdays. I went to the sentencing. I sat in the fourth row and I watched my mother stand up at the podium with a folder in her hands, and she could not find the letter she had written, and she went through the clips twice while the judge waited, and there was nobody standing next to her to find it for her. That is the whole picture I have of her now. A woman in a good blouse, in front of a bench, holding papers she cannot read fast enough, with an empty space beside her where somebody should have been. She was the person who decided for 31 years which strangers got a file opened on them. Nobody was ever going to stand up for her because she had spent her life proving that adults do not need a person, they need a form. My father sent me a message 3 weeks later that said, "I should have said something at the counter. I have not answered it." I wrote down why, for myself, in the same file where I keep everything else, and the reason is that I am not going to be the one who makes him feel better about the thing he did not do. My license was not reinstated. The review closed with a formal reprimand and a determination that I may reapply, which is a sentence that costs a state nothing to write. I have not reapplied. I work now at a small nonprofit called the Daybreak Advocacy Center, where I am the intake coordinator, and what I actually do all day is very simple. When a guardianship petition gets filed in this county, somebody has to reach the person on the other end of it before their hearing and hand them a name and a phone number. And tell them out loud that they are allowed to have somebody in the room. Of my 19, most are fine. Their new fiduciary is careful and returns calls. 2 are not fine, and I know both of their names, and I will not tell you them, because they did not consent to being in anybody's story. On Tuesday mornings, the guardianship department still calls a full calendar. Nothing I did changed that. There is a new list every week, with new names on it, and the poster in that hallway is still taped to the same wall. Thursday, 4 o'clock. The clipboard still hangs on the nail by the coffee machine at Northgate Meadows, and the pen is still tied on with a shoelace, and the third column still says, "Relationship to resident." I have no authority there anymore. I cannot approve a hearing aid or question an invoice or sit in on a care conference, and if I did not show up, no order in this county would be violated. I show up. I write my name and the time, and then, in that third column, I write a single word, and it takes me about a second, and it is not a job title. Friend. Delphine had a clear day last week. She was in the chair by the window and she asked me the thing she asks, the way some people ask about the weather. Are you mine, or are you theirs? And this time I had an answer that was true, and it was short. I said, "Nobody sends me anymore." She thought about that. She said, "Well, good," and asked whether they were doing chicken. Here is the only thing I know now that I did not know 2 years ago, and I have thought about how to say it in one sentence, so here it is. A woman who lets nobody speak for her is not strong. She is just the easiest person in the room to file a paper about. That's my story. One key I never should have handed out. One line on a sign-in sheet. And 19 people who needed somebody more than I needed to be right. If this made you think about who would speak for you, put one name in your wallet tonight, and then tell that person their name is in there. Do it today. Share this with the person whose name it is. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.